The AOS alpha plate is part of the proximal humeral plating system and is part one of a three-part series. This revolutionary design is unique to AOS. In fact, it's the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end of all humeral plating systems.
The reason why we decided to do what we did really mainly was because of the challenge of the deltoid insertion. With fractures beyond a standard 4-part fracture, 3-part fracture, as any fracture lines extend distally, or fractures that are primarily shaft fractures but high enough that they should be fixed with a proximal humerus type of plate.
The unique features of the proximal portion of the alpha plate include avoids deltoid insertion dissection and aggressive retraction, cross-trajectory screw patterns that create an inner column of metal as an additional anchor point of stability.
Traditionally, most plates on the market are a standard plate that sit on the footprint of the greater tuberosity and extend distally. They're a straight plate, and if you can imagine, as we extend this plate further and further distal, it lands exactly right over the insertion of the deltoid, which is this flat portion of the bone. If I turn and show you essentially what is an AP of the humerus, the deltoid sits right over the area where this plate would have wanted to sit. We often find ourselves having to release a very large portion of the deltoid, if not all of it, and that's a big challenge for post-operative recovery. It involves a lot more soft tissue stripping and releasing a lot of soft tissues which we would otherwise not need to if we had a plate that would essentially go around it. When we do a deltopectoral approach, the deltoid oftentimes needs to be retracted in order to get the plate on the appropriate part of the bone. That retraction sometimes, because the deltoid can be very bulky or the space is very tight, we may release some of the deltoid anyway just to be able to access the entire subdeltoid space laterally. Where here, when you place a plate onto the bone in a much more anterior position, the plate is already resting on its appropriate place proximally. So you basically don't have to feel like you're stuffing the plate all the way back onto the lateral portion of the humerus.
Cross-trajectory screw patterns that create an inner column of metal as an additional anchor point of stability.
The trajectory of the screws allows for placement of longer screws and therefore more threads into bone. One of the other interesting things is that by having all of the screws converge, they create essentially a column of metal medial to the anchor point at the plate. So if one looks axially, if we had all the screws in this plate, there would be an axial row of screws that creates an intramedullary buttress, much the same way that an intramedullary nail would act in fixation of a hip fracture. It is a buttress that would prevent the foreshortening or the over-subsidence of the humeral head at the level of the surgical neck. It's very similar to when one would place a fibular strut allograft in an intramedullary position to help provide structural support in order to avoid subsidence at the level of the surgical neck.